Welcome, everyone, to the Castle of Spirits Paranormal Podcast, episode number 23. As always, this podcast is brought to you by castleofspirits.com, where you can read 4,600 and growing true paranormal stories submitted by readers and listeners just like yourselves. Today, Vince and I had an idea that we were just each going to bring a paranormal story and kind of tell each other the story, kind of like in the olden days when we used to do that. But as it turns out, the topic that I chose for today is kind of long, and it takes up an episode of its own. So we decided to split it into 2 episodes. So today I'm going to present my topic, and next week Vince will present his. And he has no idea what it is that I'm about to tell him about. You, friends, you know what I'm about to say, but Vince doesn't.
Can I guess?
Yeah, go ahead.
The creature from the Black Lagoon.
No.
Oh.
Today, Vince, what I am here to tell you and our fine listeners about is the Ghostbusters house.
The Ghostbusters house?
Mm-hmm.
As in like Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, Annie Potts even. And don't forget Ernie Hudson.
AKA the Ackley House.
Okay.
AKA America's only legally haunted house.
What? Okay, wait, no, I've heard of this.
Yeah.
It's been a house that's been deemed or found in a court of law to be actually haunted.
Not really. The court didn't say, yes, this house is haunted.
Apparently, Mr. Moon, the Castle Cat, has heard of this. He's making his voice known.
Yeah, he's trying to trounce on my story time here. So, the Ackley House, as I'll refer to it throughout the story, it stands at 1 Lavetta Place in Nyack, New York. And I kind of went back and forth on, do I even want to say the address? But I mean, the address is everywhere.
Is it listed on Zillow?
It is.
Is it expensive?
Yes, we will get to that. And unlike the Amityville house, the image is not blurred out on Google Maps, so you can look at it. It's a beautiful house. Let me tell you about the house.
All right. It
was built in 1890, and it has, well, it depends on where you look. Some places say it has 5 bedrooms. Some places say 8 bedrooms. Some places say 3.5 baths. Some places say 5 bathrooms. All of them say it's more than 4,600 square feet. So it's a big boy.
Is this a house that exists in 2 separate universes where in one universe there's 5 bathrooms?
I think some of it is, like remodeling has changed the floor plan.
Oh.
Anyway, it's a Victorian house. Like I said, it was built in 1890, and it's gorgeous. It used to be red, but now it's kind of a light blue, like a baby blue. It's got this really beautiful turret, and it's waterfront property on the Hudson River. And so like the whole one side of the house is essentially on the shore of the Hudson River. And it's got stained glass, like the original stained glass, wraparound porch, period woodwork and fixtures all intact and inside. It's just a beautiful, beautiful house. It's on this little dead end on this street that just kind of ends at the river. It's a beautiful street.
Now, is it privately owned?
Yes.
Oh.
And we will talk about that. So the house I couldn't find a lot of information about it before all of these occurrences. In fact, I found exactly 0 information about the house before these occurrences, but it was purchased by Helen and George Ackley in 1967. And George actually died in 1978. So about 11 years later, George died of complications from heart surgery, but Helen lived in the house with their 4 children until she sold the place in about 1989, 1990. And she put the house up for sale, and a man named Jeffrey Stambovsky entered into contract to purchase the house, he and his wife. And during the time that they lived in the house, they had experienced lots of hauntings, which we'll get into. We're just kind of going to go over the legal stuff first. They had experienced hauntings, and Helen actually wrote an article and submitted it to Reader's Digest, kind of detailing the hauntings in the home. And the link to the Reader's Digest article is in the show notes, and you can read it. It's a great read. And most of my information about the haunting is based off of that article there. She also reported to the local paper a few times that the house was haunted. And the house was actually on a 5-house walking tour in the city of Nyack. I assume that was like a 5-house walking tour for haunted houses, but I didn't see anything that specifically said that. Now, Jeffrey Stambovsky, he lived in New York City, so he didn't know anything about the house or its reputation at the time. Remember, this is the late 80s, early 90s, so there really wasn't the internet to be able to Google a place and see its history or find archived versions of Reader's Digest articles or anything. He wasn't
like a Reader's Digest subscriber.
Right. And I didn't mention, she actually wrote the Reader's Digest article in 1977, I believe. Yeah, because it was a year before George died, and he died in 78. So he didn't know anything about the house's reputation. Now, Helen and her realtor, they claimed that they told him about the haunting, to which he laughed and replied, quote, "We'll have to call in the Ghostbusters." And the realtor, he said that he specifically remembered that they told Stambovsky this because Helen had refused to sign the contract for the sale until she knew that he had been told. So the realtor said that he called Stambovsky and told him this, where he said, "Oh, well, we'll have to call the Ghostbusters." The realtor reported back to Helen, "I told him." She said, "Okay." Then she signed her end of the contract. Now, Stambovsky says that he was never told that the house was reportedly haunted or that it had this history. He was concerned that this kind of a history or a stigma attached to the house would reduce the value of the house, which actually in some of the things I saw, it did exactly the opposite. One report said that in later years, it sold for over $600,000 more than it was valued at. So anyway, about a week after they signed the contracts, not the closing, it hadn't closed yet, they signed the contracts for the house, Stambovsky asked Helen to come to the property to talk to him and his wife about the ghosts because he had found out about the alleged haunting from a local contractor. So she goes there and she gives him the full story, kind of lays it out for him, everything that happened. Well, he and his wife I think they're probably a little bit freaked out, but also he was worried that it would affect the market value of the house. And I think also he didn't want people who were interested in those kinds of things traipsing all over their yard.
Well, at that time, I'm sure that they were just a stone's throw from Amityville. And Exactly. If you read a newspaper or turned on the TV during that time, you probably saw all the furor over the Amityville house, and he was probably thinking, wait a minute.
Yeah, I don't want that happening at my house, for sure. And by the way, I just wanted to say the reason I was hesitant to say the address, we want to make sure that everybody knows that it's not cool to go even drive by a house because it's this storied house that's supposedly haunted. Please don't harass the people who live there. Please don't go to the house.
Yeah, don't do it.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's just not nice.
Just don't.
Imagine if you lived there. You would hate that. I would hate that. So anyway, she tells him that. He gets mad. He says that he doesn't want to buy the house anymore. He sues her for rescission of the sale, as well as damages for fraudulent representation. And you can read on Wikipedia. It gives you almost all of the ins and outs about this case. I'm just breaking it down into small bite sizes because I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand all of this. I'm just giving you the broad strokes here. So at first, when he made the lawsuit, it was dismissed by the court because New York State at the time followed a property law, basically caveat emptor is what it was called, which basically means buyer beware. So if you don't do your due diligence, you get what you get, basically. So he appeals the decision, and the New York State Supreme Court takes up the case and reverses the decision, saying that basically ghosts aren't something that's reasonable or possible to inspect for. Basically, a person wouldn't know to ask those kinds of questions, and no matter how much or what kind of inspecting you do, that's just not something you're going to discover, no matter how much due diligence you do, basically. So they overturned that ruling.
Yeah, the average home inspector isn't going to carry around one of those
an EMF detector,
an EMF
or something.
detector or a spirit box.
Yeah.
Especially back then.
Right. So I liked these quotes. This is out of the Wikipedia article. Part of what the New York State Supreme Court said was, whereas here, the seller not only takes unfair advantage of the buyer's ignorance, but has created and perpetuated a condition about which he is unlikely to even inquire, enforcement of the contract in whole or in part is offensive to the court's sense of equity. Application of the remedy of rescission within the bounds of the narrow exception to the doctrine of caveat emptor set forth herein is entirely appropriate to relieve the unwitting purchaser from the consequences of a most unnatural bargain.
Wow.
Yeah, it
That's
gets better.
Mouthful.
Oh, no, it gets better. So apparently throughout the whole opinion by the New York State Supreme Court, they keep referencing different ghosts and haunting, like they're making puns and jokes throughout the thing. So a couple of quotes in the Wikipedia article from it is, plaintiff hasn't had a ghost of a chance.
Oh boy.
And I am moved by the spirit of equity. And the notion is a hobgoblin which should be exorcised from the body of legal precedent.
Wow.
I just love that some lawyer who, you think of lawyers as being kind of stuffy, some lawyer went through all the energy of putting things like that.
It was probably a really talented and bored paralegal that did that.
Yeah. But I thought that was hilarious. So basically, long story short, through all of the legal ins and outs, One Lavetta Place is now considered America's only legally haunted house. So basically, the court isn't saying, yeah, we find that this place is haunted. They're saying, look, this person went through the effort of notifying national publications as well as local publications of the hauntings in this house. It's been documented by people more than just the family members. They had people outside of the family who had witnessed this. It was on local tours. The neighborhood knew, it was this whole identity of the house on a national level. So essentially, they weren't ruling that the house itself was actually haunted, but they were ruling that the house itself had this reputation of being haunted. And that's what a buyer should be notified of.
And I agree. I mean, if it was, if we were talking about the Amityville house, then you would ask the question, what rock have you been living under?
Yeah.
I can't imagine somebody buying that house, the Amityville house, and saying, wait a minute, you didn't tell me that there were people walking up and down the street taking pictures all day long.
Right.
But in this case, I've never even heard of the house. I've heard of the case mentioned in passing, but I've never heard of the house. So I can see that happening.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure everybody's got a little bit of a different take on the situation. But if I were buying a house, let's just go back to Amityville, because this one, there's no history of like violence and death in the house. I did see that at one point there was a guest who died of a brain aneurysm or something in the house, but it didn't say anything about when that happened, or
it was not ghost induced.
Right. But let's say Amityville. because it's got the dark background and the haunting reputation. If I were buying a house like that, it would really kind of be neither here nor there that a murder had taken place in the house. Either I want the house or I don't. And a murder wouldn't sway that decision. But knowing that this house has a reputation and that I might have weirdos showing up or driving by constantly, coming up to the door and asking to look around or, whatever, those are nuisances that I would absolutely need to be aware of before I moved into the house. I would be required to know that information.
So wait, are you saying that if you wanted to buy a house and you found out that there had been a murder there, that wouldn't sway your opinion?
No, I don't think
against it?
so.
Really?
Mm-mm.
Huh.
I mean, it's something that happened. We don't know what's happened in our house. Just because there hasn't been a murder here, it doesn't mean that horrible things haven't happened. It doesn't mean that amazingly wonderful, joyous things haven't happened. It's things that have happened. It really doesn't have any impact on the lives that we live within the house. I mean, if you're super superstitious and, freaked out, you might, I don't know. If there was a murder in the house that I was going to buy, I would almost rather not know, because I wouldn't want to walk into the room and be like, oh, I bet the body was laying right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd just rather not know it because it's of no consequence. But people coming onto the property being weird, yeah, you need to know that.
Yeah.
So
that's more impactful.
Yeah. So, so it was deemed America's only legally haunted house. So, Vince, I bet you're wondering about, how did it get this reputation of being haunted in the first place?
I am.
What kind of haunting are we talking about?
Yeah, I would hear of this.
All right, well, let's talk about it. So, when the Ackleys first purchased the house, it had been standing empty for about 7 years.
Whoa.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of information as to why. I saw one report somewhere that said the family who had lived in the house before still lived in the area, but that they didn't really know why it was empty. So it had been empty for about 7 years. It was kind of in rough condition, but Helen said that she knew that as soon as they walked in through the front door, she felt like she was at home and she loved the house just immediately. So they buy the house and George, her husband, moves in immediately because he was working in New York City and he needed to live there so he could commute to work. So Helen, with the 4 kids, would stay behind at their house in Maryland while they worked on selling it. And then she would kind of come back and forth and work on renovations in the new house. So one day she gets back to the house at Lavetta Place. And when she gets there, there's a group of neighborhood kids outside playing, and they're giving her like 20 questions. Did you really buy this house? Do you have kids? Did you know that you are buying a haunted house? They immediately tell her this house is haunted. Did you know that? And she said to the kids, yeah, you can go in the house and, walk through the house if you want to. And a couple of them were like giggling and they went in, but a couple more stayed out and they were acting nervous. And that's when the other kids said, oh, they don't want to go in because it's haunted.
Did the ones who went in, don't tell me they came out with white hair.
They were traumatized.
They were never seen again. I guess not.
No. So shortly after that, the same day, there's a plumber who's working on the house, working on the water pipe system, whatever. And he's acting kind of nervous. And he asks her, because George was gone. George wasn't there. He was at work. He asks her, are you going to be here long? And she said, well, yeah, I have to go pick up George at 5:00. So I'll be here until about 4:30. Why? And he tells her that he's just nervous to leave her there by herself because he keeps hearing footsteps throughout the house. He had been working there apparently for a few days, and every day he would hear footsteps in the house and he would run out and try to see who was there, but he could never find anyone.
Whoa.
So she said that she's like, well, it's my house, so I guess I better get used to being in it alone. So I'll be okay. You can go. And then later that same day, so this is the third thing this day, right? The kids asking, did you know you bought a haunted house? The plumber being like, yo, this place is haunted. That night, she and her husband are getting ready for bed. And just as she gets into bed, she realizes that the light in the hallway is on. So she gets up to go turn the light off, and he like snaps at her. What are you doing? She's like, well, I'm going to go turn off the light in the hall. And she says, or he demands that she leave it on. No, leave it on. And she says, since when have you slept with the light on? And he replies, since the first night I moved in here, and I don't want to discuss it. Good night.
Wow.
Yeah.
Communication is important.
For reals. So she said she was really confused by this, and she's laying in bed, trying to go to sleep, and she's wondering what is it with all these men who are so afraid of this house, where she felt nothing but, peace, and just she really loved the house and felt completely comfortable there. She wasn't freaked out at all. So shortly after that is when all of the hauntings kind of started, when everybody in the family started experiencing things like, the classic doors slamming, windows flying open,
children levitating.
No, levitating children. Footsteps all over the house at all hours of the day and night. And a light cord dangling over the dining room table. I really like this one. I don't know why. It's creepy to me. A light cord hanging over the dining room table. It just starts swinging on its own. And then suddenly, in mid-swing, it stops as if a hand reached out and grabbed it. Just an invisible hand.
And this is something that they saw? She saw?
It didn't say who saw. It was just one of the things that the family saw.
It seems to me that she would be less likely to see this because it appears that she's been charmed by the house. So the house is not going to show her.
I think it's not quite. Yeah. Anyway, she has several experiences, which we're going to cover. Okay. But she just never really felt threatened there. Throughout the whole Reader's Digest article, she's talking about how she found the ghosts entertaining and that the whole family enjoyed the ghosts. They kind of felt like they had a protector who was like 24 hours a day on duty patrolling the house. So
I can see that. Yeah.
It was never anything that was malicious. There's one story which we'll get to in a little bit where the person who experienced it felt a little bit threatened, but then in hindsight said that they didn't believe that it was a threat. So really, overall, it seems like a fairly positive experience. And it could have just been the attitude of the family. So anyway, this is my very favorite story out of all of it. One night, it was wintertime. George was out of town on work, and Helen was up late at night. She said she did this frequently. She would be up into the early hours of the morning reading or just walking around the house, which is a little weird. But
this is what we did in the old days before social media.
Yeah, before the internet. We just walked around and looked out the windows.
Even before the home video revolution. If you were up late at night, you would just walk around the house.
Yeah. And this is the 70s, so it was all of those things. So Helen's up late, and she is looking out of the window over the Hudson River, and she's just really enjoying the view. It's, the city lights reflecting in the river, and she's just thinking about how beautiful it is. And she mentioned that she was just really trying to commit this scene to memory. She was just really enjoying it. And suddenly, the left side of her body was just cold. This chill just came over the left side of her body, and like all of her hair, her arms and her head, everything on the left side just stood up.
I would immediately think that was some sort of a medical emergency.
Yeah, you would.
But you couldn't get on WebMD back then.
And you shouldn't get on WebMD today. So she said that she knew she wasn't alone and that there was somebody standing next to her looking out the window at the scene with her.
Ooh.
And she said out loud, "It's beautiful on the river, isn't it?" And when she said that she felt her hair lay back down and she just felt calm. She didn't feel threatened by the presence next to her, and they continued to stand there and look out the window for a few more minutes together, she says. And after a few minutes, she turned around and walked across the room to the door. And when she got there, she said out loud again, "Thank you for sharing the view with me. I'm going to bed now. Good night." And then she continued down the hall toward her bedroom, and she said she felt like she was alone. So whoever it was, they looked out the window with her, enjoyed the view, walked across the room with her. She said that when she turned away from the window to walk across the room, the presence next to her also turned and walked with her, but it didn't follow her down the hall. And I just really liked that story. I thought it was creepy, but it also felt very intimate and very, very personal.
Okay, that makes me think of something.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I actually read about today.
Oh.
It's called the third man factor. Have you heard of this?
Is that about like hikers when they're lost in the woods, or?
The third man factor is also called third man syndrome, that it refers to scenarios where there's an unseen presence that is felt by a person that offers some sort of comfort or even support during traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
But in this case, it wasn't a traumatic experience. However, it's a thing that people experience.
Well, and she was alone. And it sounds like when she was alone, when her husband was away, she was up in the middle of the night late a lot. And to me, I mean, I don't want to, editorialize this woman's life, but to me, that sounds like there was quite possibly some mental, emotional angst at being alone, and that very well could lead to that kind of an experience.
Yeah, just looking that up real quick on Wikipedia today, what I learned was that one of the famous instances was this Antarctic explorer dude named Shackleton, or Ernest Shackleton.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a book in 1919 or 1920 where he described being joined by this sort of mystical companion during the final leg of his expedition.
Didn't he say something like when it was really bad, like when he was hungry or kind of despairing or the weather was really bad, this mystical presence would show up, but when he was fed or the weather wasn't bad, he was feeling hopeful, optimistic, this person would disappear and it would kind of come and go, right?
Right, and that sort of hints at that being a physiological experience,
right,
rather than an actual spiritual one. And, it just begs the question, do people experience these things all the time? And maybe that is what the vast majority of haunting experiences are.
Maybe, yeah. That's a good point. I've never thought about that before.
However, I have yet to hear the rest of the story.
That's true.
Please continue.
You haven't. So they had 4 kids, like I said, and their oldest daughter, Cynthia, reported that every morning she would be woken up by her bed shaking, being shaken. And
the shook. Wow,
that's
the bed
right.
shaking. Okay, that's not a third man syndrome.
No. And if she didn't get up immediately, the bed would shake even harder. So she had a Christmas break. It was during Christmas break, and she was really looking forward to sleeping in, but her bed started shaking and she had to get up so the bed would stop shaking. And she was telling Helen about this, telling her mother about it, saying, how it was kind of freaky, but at the same time, it was irritating because she was really looking forward to sleeping in. She was 15 years old, a teenager. She's really looking forward to sleeping in.
I don't get that. I don't get how somebody experiences their bed shaking by itself and just gets a little annoyed and gets up out of bed, you would immediately, I'd go for the Ghostbusters.
Or a flamethrower.
I'd say, does anybody here know where I can find Lorraine and Ed Warren? Or go to the local church or something and say, hey, I'm not Catholic or anything.
Up.
I'm going to Catholic up. So do I have to give some money, put some money in the coffers before you come out and start exorcising this thing out of my house? Or I don't know.
How do we make this bed stop shaking?
Or just get so freaked out that you don't sleep in that room anymore.
Or, you know what you could do? Exactly what she and Helen decided to try, and just ask the ghost. Say, hey, I don't have to be up early in the morning. I'm on break. Please don't wake me up. And guess what? The ghost didn't wake her up for the rest of the Christmas break. So they just asked nicely, and it complied with the request. So the other kids in the house would occasionally feel their beds shaking too, but it doesn't sound like it was real often. One of the kids, he only felt it later after he had gone off to college. When he would come back to visit, he would feel it, the bed shaking to wake him up. Another one of the kids only felt it one time, and it was when he slept in Cynthia's room. And the other daughter, Cara Lee, she was an early riser, and so just naturally got up early and didn't feel it. But one of the things that she experienced was they had a sofa in the living room, and she always felt like there was somebody sitting on the sofa staring at her. So she was always kind of trying to figure out, who is this person, and trying to see if she could see them. So there was also a window in the living room that would randomly fly open. And it said it would fly open and startle guests. So I don't know if it only happened when guests were around or what. But whenever it would happen, whoever would close the window, whether it was Helen or George or one of the kids, they would always, when they would go to close it, they would kind of mumble or murmur to themselves, "That's enough now," and they would close it and latch the window, and it would stop flying open. But Helen said that in the summer, a lot of times she would intentionally leave the window unlocked so the ghosts could, quote, have at it.
Oh, God.
So she's very accommodating to the ghosts, So now up until this point, all of the hauntings had really just been sounds, feelings, a door or a window flying open. Nobody had seen a ghost, but that was all about to change.
Oh no.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're starting this. Oh my God.
Yep. So the Ackleys were about to meet their otherworldly roommates.
Roommates.
The first time that it happened, Helen was on a stepladder and she was painting a ceiling, and George and the kids weren't home. The kids were at school. George was at work, and she was painting this ceiling, and she kept feeling like somebody was watching her, which she said wasn't a feeling out of the ordinary. It's a little unnerving, but she was used to it. And she kept looking around the room and didn't see anybody. So suddenly, she keeps going. She keeps having this feeling. Suddenly she said that she felt like the eyes were just boring into the back of her head. And she says out loud, "I hope you like the color. I hope you're pleased with what we're doing to the house. It certainly must have been lovely when it was first built." Then she looks over her shoulder and she sees the figure of a man. It sounded like he was floating in midair, kind of sitting cross-legged with his hands on his knees. He was kind of nodding at her and smiling and rocking back and forth.
Oh, God.
Floating in the air doing this. It's such a wild imagery, and it's about to get even more wild. She described him as having white hair and eyebrows. He had apple cheeks. I take that to mean the big, round, rosy red cheeks, piercing blue eyes, and he was wearing a light blue suit with ruffles at the wrists and at the neck. He was wearing short pants to his knee that were cut to his knee with white stockings or socks, tall white stockings or socks, and, quote, shiny black pumps with buckles So I'm kind of picturing like a Paul Revere type character without the 3-pointed hat.
A Paul Revere era drag queen.
Yeah, very like 18th century flamboyant.
Barry Lyndon. Barry Lyndon is what I'm getting.
Yeah. That is kind of, a whole Barry Lyndon vibe. So she said that he seemed very happy. He was smiling and everything and nodding. And she said that she was very pleased that she got to meet him. So Cynthia, the oldest daughter, she said that she would see, when Helen told her about the man that she had seen, Cynthia said that she would see in her room fairly regularly a tall, thin, shadowy woman who was wearing like a hooded cloak. There wasn't any other information on that, just that she would see this figure. So Helen's cousin, Alfred, and his wife, Ingrid, they came to visit for a few days. This is when it starts extending outside of the family. I mean, some of their guests had heard things. They would experience like doors that wouldn't stay shut. They would hear footsteps, doors closing, etc. They would apparently experience the window flying open. But Alfred and Ingrid were the first ones who like really had an intense encounter at the house. So one morning, Ingrid gets up and she's really kind of shaken. She was like holding a cup of coffee and kind of shuddering. Like she was pretty freaked out. And Helen asks her, what's the matter? And Ingrid says that she was awoken in the middle of the night by the sound of someone walking around in their room. And she opens her eyes and she sees a man in a powdered wig and like Revolutionary War era dress. And he's pacing the room and he sits down on the foot of the bed. And she said she could feel the bed depress where he sat down. And he has this large book that he's flipping through, like he's looking for something. And the book seems to almost be glowing, like it's emanating some kind of light. I couldn't help it. I totally pictured the briefcase from Pulp Fiction.
Right.
So he's looking through this book. And then after a while, he closes the book, stands up, and disappears.
That's called the Ghost of Vamoose.
All right. So later, when Cynthia got married, she and her husband, Mark Kavanaugh, they lived in the home for a while. And it sounds like they had a lot of extended family who lived in this house, in later years. A son and daughter-in-laws, grandchildren, the kids, etc. So, I mean, it's 4,600 square foot house.
It's a regular Grand Central Station.
There's room for a few people.
Yeah.
So Cynthia and Mark lived in the house for a while. And Mark said, this is the story that I told you where he felt a little bit threatened and frightened. But in later years when he thought about it, he said that he felt like he was being appraised to see if he was good enough to marry Cynthia. So he said one night he's trying to fall asleep. Cynthia had already fallen asleep and he heard the door creak open. And he's laying on the bed with his back to the edge of the bed. So he's like facing away from the door or whatever.
No, you should not do that.
No, don't do that.
Sometimes I like to turn over on my left side, right? But invariably, I always end up flipping back because I'm thinking, you don't know what's coming up behind you. I mean, the alarms haven't gone off. There's nobody entering the house, but what if they're already inside?
See, and I'm okay putting my back to the door because I've got you and a dog with a very large bork.
Got a large bork and a dork.
A large bork and a dork. Okay, anyway, he's got his back to the edge of the bed. He hears the door creak open, and he feels someone sit on the edge of the bed and lean against him. Yeah, that's not what you want to feel.
No. I don't want that.
So he said he was able eventually, he kind of laid there for a minute. He was eventually able to like turn his head just a little bit, and he saw a woman in a soft dress leaning against him and looking at him. Like she was just kind of leaning over him, staring at him.
No way.
Yeah. And after a few moments, she just got up and left the room. So yeah, he felt kind of weirded out by that, felt a little threatened at first, but then later just felt like he was being appraised to see if he was okay for Cynthia to marry. and he must have passed the test. So one of the last notable occurrences were the family would receive small gifts. Just
gifts?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Not dead mice. Like a cat. Look, I brought something home for you. Little gifts would just appear in the house during kind of celebratory times for the family. So like when Cynthia, I think when she got married, something like that, she received, it doesn't say how, it just says received, a little silver pair of sugar tongs. So like the little pinchy things that you get sugar cubes out of a bowl.
It was probably in the registry,
I guess. So
they got Afterlife Ghost credits.
Yeah. So she got a little pair of silver sugar tongs.
Free delivery.
And
nice.
When Helen's first grandchild was born, the baby received a little embossed gold baby ring. And
now, did they say how they received this? Did it just show up?
That's all it said. Yeah. There was one of Helen's daughter-in-laws received some coins of some kind that just like appeared. So they would receive these little gifts. In Wikipedia, it mentions the gifts and says that the gifts would appear and then disappear. But I didn't see anywhere else that the gifts disappeared.
You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, that's,
giving gifts and taking them away.
That's right. That's not nice. So, like I said before, Helen claims that they never felt threatened by any of this. Occasionally they would feel a little bit frightened, but never anything more than that. And she is reported to said after the Stambovsky incident, she ended up selling the house to somebody else. And she moved to Florida, and she said that she was going to take the ghosts with her. And apparently she did, because there have been no other reports of hauntings happening in the house. Oh, I forgot to mention, after the Stambovsky incident, which that's what I'm calling it, that's not what anybody else calls it, lots of people actually popped up to buy this house. Oh, it's a haunted house. I want to buy it. There were like 50 people waiting in the wings to try and buy this house. And Vince, can you guess who one of them was?
George Lutz.
Kreskin.
The Kreskin.
The Kreskin.
Kreskin, wasn't he the guy that appeared for many, many years periodically on Johnny Carson?
I think so. He was a mentalist, and he was popular in the 70s. But anyway, Kreskin was one of the people who was like, oh, I want to buy the house, but he did not buy the house.
Well, mentalists, they have a hard time getting credits.
They're mental, man. So when Helen and George lived in the house, there was a paranormal researcher and a medium who were working together. I don't even have their names. It's all in the Wikipedia article, but they contacted Helen and said, oh, we have determined who two of the ghosts in your house are. They're these 18th century people who lived in the area named Sir George and Lady Margaret. So, take that for what it's worth.
Okay, so does she know then the history? Did she ever put it together saying there was a guy that looked like this with the rosy cheeks and that was the previous owner or the owner 5 owners ago?
The way that guy was dressed, that's very, like they said, Revolutionary War. The house was built in 1890. People didn't dress like that in the 1890s.
So there may have been a house there before.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. It seems like she did refer to the ghost that she saw as Sir George. And I assume they referred to the ghost that Cynthia would see as, Lady Margaret. But I don't know. I don't know how much stock I put into things like that. People who contact and they're like, oh, hey, we've determined. I don't know. There's apparently a book on Amazon. They said it's still on Amazon today, written by these guys. Their names were Bill Merrill and Glenn Johnson. And they wrote a book called Sir George, the Ghost of Nyack. And that is apparently still available on Amazon. So if you're so inclined, check it out. Let me know what you think. I have not read it myself. But Helen died in 2003.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I know. And her son-in-law believes that her ghost he said that he would bet money that her ghost has taken up residence at One Lavetta Place. But again, no hauntings have been recorded or reported since then. So
I kind of like the idea. I like the idea that in her dying moments, if whatever happens when you die, if you get the opportunity to fly to a place that you were very fond of, maybe either stay there or visit there, I can fully imagine her going there and then for the first time ever entering the place as one of the ethereals.
Yeah, and getting to meet the others there officially.
Becoming one with the house, and then, maybe bringing some more positivity to the house in the future.
Yeah.
She sounded like she was a grounded
Yeah, she seemed really put together, very positive, and it seems like she and her family loved the house. It said that she sold the house because she wanted to downsize. Her husband had died 12 years before. So, that's a really large house for one elderly woman, or a woman approaching her elderly years, to continue to live in. So it's not a surprise that she would sell it. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either if she's like, I think I'm going to go back to my heyday house. I like that idea. I think it's sweet.
Yeah, it is.
So Vince, that is the story of the Ghostbusters house, aka the Ackley House, aka America's only legally haunted house.
I love the story.
I really enjoyed it too. When I chose it for this episode, I really just thought it would be fun to talk about the only legally haunted house in America. I didn't honestly know anything about the actual haunting, so I wasn't sure that there'd be a lot of meat to the story. And then as I started researching it, I was like, oh.
Speaking of meat and stories, if anybody is listening out there right now has a story to tell that has a lot of meat to it.
Maybe a couple of potatoes.
That'd be good. Sounds good. Yeah. A biscuit or two. Why don't you go to castleofspirits.com and share your story with us? We'd like to hear it.
We would love it. And if you have ideas for future episodes, questions, information, opinions about this or any other episode we've done, head to castleofspirits.com/lounge, and maybe we'll read it on a future episode.
Also, don't forget to check out our YouTube videos.
What's that sound?
Nope, there it is.
Yep, gotta hurry.
Once again. And that brings to a close another episode of the Castle of Spirits Paranormal Podcast. If you like the show, tell a friend.
And if you hate the show, tell two enemies.
Either way, everyone will have a ghostly good time.
Oh, boy.